Here are the top 5 mistakes that everyone makes. No matter what role or what rank, these blunders happen all the time. Fixing these is the first step to unlocking a fuller understanding of Overwatch, and with how complicated this game is, it's about time to polish up on your gameplay. If you want more educational content to help you improve, take a look in the description for a GameLeap subscription. On the GameLeap website, there's lots of resources to help drop bad habits and cultivate good ones, across all heroes and for every rank. Make sure to check it out and enjoy the video. Number 5 is holding onto your ultimate for too long. Ultimates are immeasurably important in Overwatch, so it makes sense to want to save it for the right moment. But depending on what hero you're playing, it's most likely better to try to use it as soon as possible, without holding onto it for too long. This is most important for fast building ultimates, like Nano Boost and Amplification Matrix. Sitting on your ultimate means you'll build less total ultimates during the game, meaning less power spikes that give your team a big boost in winning teamfights. Using your ultimate first, even if it won't get a massive team-wide potential, is also important to force abilities and other ultimates on the enemy team to then get a later advantage towards the middle and end of the fight. If you're a Genji with Dragonblade playing against a Bat Brig, they're not magically going to get their cooldowns forced unless your team makes an aggressive engage. And in the late game, going for a dry engage without ultimates into a team that has ultimates will usually get you punished hard. So even though getting a 5k with Dragonblade is great, using it aggressively and often while preparing to kite and survive will often be super impactful, forcing both defensive cooldowns and ultimates. And the higher rank you get, the more ultimates you'll need to win fights, as well as more players try to clutch fights with their ultimates, not worrying about holding them for later, but instead playing to out-tempo their opponent and keep hitting massive power spikes, keeping the pressure up on the enemy team. Even for defensive ultimates like Transcendence and Sound Barrier, there's great ways to use them aggressively, especially for Zenyatta by baiting yourself in an aggressive position, then trancing to help your team punish. For Sound Barrier, it's as simple as speeding in aggressively and getting ready to beat once people get low, keeping the fight going with a massive pace. Number 4 is taking too much damage before the fight. This is especially important for tank players, who are the ones taking the most poke. But for a lot of DPS and supports, it's really vital to avoid getting chipped down before the fight starts. For tanks, your defensive cooldowns are really important. That's the understatement of the year. Even though Orisa is super strong, taking unnecessary damage is one of the only ways to get punished. It's simple advice. We all want to deal damage before the fight starts for a lot of reasons. Not giving space for free, slowing down the enemy team's advance, threatening them with getting picks with just spam, building ultimates. They're all good ways to play your pre-fight. But when you take too much damage before the fight, you don't necessarily risk dying immediately, but you definitely will get your abilities forced, and also make your healers focused on healing you up back to full. Small bits of damage will usually get healed up no problem, but any more than that and you're setting your team back by a lot. As Genji, getting your deflect forced by poking too much and swinging too wide will mean you can't go aggressive when you see an opportunity for an engage. Taking too much damage as Lucio will force you to use your amp heal to survive, and not be able to speed your team aggressively, nor heal them all up to peel them after an enemy engage. And for a tank example, being too far from cover as Sigma will force you to use all your shield and your kinetic grasp to avoid dying, making it hard to walk your team forward, and also letting the enemy team take a lot of space. And the way to fix this is easy, and it slightly depends on your hero. Heroes with short cooldown mobility like Tracer and Winston can use the movement to jump from cover to close a distance before committing onto a target, dodging a lot of unnecessary damage. Heroes with more defensive cooldowns can play more corners and avoid peeking too hard and too wide. And when you do walk forward, make sure to stay close to cover in case you take unexpected damage. Number 3 is engaging without forcing cooldowns. This is especially prominent in lower ranks, and it's also why a lot of dive and rush comps feel weaker in ranked than the easier spammier comps. Dive and rush do require more teamwork to pull off, but good dive and rush work not because of simple-minded 3-2-1 calls, but rather because their mobility allows them to set up and engage and time it for the most successful push. Even in static poke comps, you may wonder how you're supposed to gain an advantage over the enemy team besides just hitting more shots. Overwatch is highly mechanical, but coordination and timing will always make a bigger difference. Making an effort to force a cooldown, especially the one that's going to give you the most trouble for whatever plan you're pulling off, will give you a crazy early fight advantage. And with how snowbally the game can be, a good first step forward is invaluable. The best example of this is with Bastion, who is basically at a 90% pick rate this season. Bastion's recon form has gotten stronger, but his power lies almost entirely in his turret form, dealing insane amounts of damage and resisting some himself. And since that power is on a cooldown, it can be baited out, and quite easily at that. Engaging with or without ultimates into a Bastion form is a rough ordeal unless you have an EMP. By doing what's called a soft engage or a soft dive, you can fight for space on the map, committing little to no abilities at all. Winston's quite good at this, and in high ranks in pro play, Winston players often use the 5-second jump cooldown to move to a safe position or even straight up to a defensive high ground, but not landing on it to force a reaction out of the enemy team. Against Bastion, it's really easy, but it's still a reliable play against other heroes. You can also force cooldowns, particularly for tank heroes, by simply shooting them really hard. Sigma and Orisa are almost impossible to kill with Baptiste's amplification matrix, but force the kinetic grasp and javelin spin by focusing them, and your double damage will start to really sting for the enemy team. Number 2. Not waiting for your cooldowns before re-engaging. Now that we've forced cooldowns before going in for the first time, we're going to want to be more patient when we engage for the second time. When playing heroes that want to engage, it's easy to want to go in as fast as possible and as often as possible. But don't fall into the trap of re-engaging too early, before you have the abilities that actually help you survive when you go in. A Winston engaging without bubble or a Genji dashing in without deflect is a lot weaker than a full cooldown engage. This even applies to more defensive heroes like Ana. Throwing an aggressive nade then pushing up close before the nade is ready again in case it needs to be used defensively is really dangerous. It's especially important for longer cooldowns. Overwatch is a pretty fast-paced game, but at the same time, without an effective engage, it's really hard to get kills through all the burst heal and peel, and defensive tank cooldowns. A Baptiste who gets his regen burst forced out can't play as aggressively without it, or he risks getting bursted down and unable to recover. A Mei without her ice block can't push as consistently without risking being one-shot. And for Queen, without your shout, not only are you more likely to die, but you also can't push in fast to start the fight off in your favor. No matter which role you're on, try to reset more often, taking a moment to breathe and chill and get your cooldowns back to go in for a second engage that's equally as strong as the first. Number 1. Contesting point too early. Needing to touch point to trigger overtime happens almost every game of Overwatch, and so many players get this wrong. Playing for time is a really important skill to learn, especially since it's always at a critical point in the game. Win and you end the round, or win to keep your push going. But you've got to touch at the right time, and when there's less than 20 seconds left, you'll want to use almost all of it to set up a last strong fight. Overtime triggers by touching the point 3 seconds before time runs out. So not only should you time the touch that way, but by touching the point at 3 seconds and then falling back, you can bait a lot of early abilities while still activating the overtime. By doing this, you get an effective amount of almost 8 seconds of setting up after touching the point. Plenty of breathing room to time your final fight properly. Remember that the first step to winning an overtime clutch is getting the overtime trigger without dying, or at least surviving as long as you can until you can muster up as close to a 5v5 as possible. Secondly, don't touch point all at once. While it's sometimes hard to coordinate in ranked, there's always going to be someone on your team who has the best chance of either touching first or touching without dying. It's best to avoid 2 people touching at once, since you only need 1 person to trigger the overtime, while everyone else should put all their effort into winning the fight, instead of just prolonging the loss. And finally, if you don't have mobility cooldowns to get out of spawn fast, if you die after the 20-second mark, you almost always have to switch your hero to someone faster, even if you have your ultimate. Winning a 5v5 with no ultimates is easier than winning a 4v5 with an ultimate coming well after overtime has started. That's it for now. Try these quick fixes out in your next game and let me know in the comments if there are any other common mistakes you're seeing from your teammates, or if you're really humble and self-reflective, mistakes from yourself. See you next time, and thanks for watching.